So without further ado, I will introduce our speaker for today. So Kyle Joyner has lived in Helena for the past 6 years. He's an avid hiker and member of the Helena community, and he's also served on the board of Helena Young Professionals and performed on the stage at the Helena Avenue Theater. But his passion is making wine, and specifically mead, which is why we're here tonight. So he's been making mead for 10 years, sharing it with others, and enjoys crafting a wide variety of meads. And he's going to tell us more about that process and what mead making is like here in Helena. So welcome, Kyle.
Thank you. I'd first and foremost like to thank the Montana Historical Society. It's a great honor, and to be able to come out and share this with you tonight. I will announce one thing that might be a disappointment to some of you. I do not have any samples. But it is my hope that the samples of knowledge that I conveyed to you tonight may yet fill your cup in days or a later point in time to come. So, everything has an origin story. And before I get to the brewing itself and the process and everything that comes along with it, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the story of mead. Mead is the oldest form of alcohol, the least labor-intensive, the healthiest, and also the most environmentally friendly. So we're going to start off with the first part first, the elder part of this beverage. Mead, originally known as meadu, which is from Old English, from the 1500 years ago, thereabouts, means wine that is made from honey. But what's in a name? Because mead has had multiple names throughout the course of its existence. In fact, it has preceded the existence of the names that have been attributed to it. Because unlike every other form of alcohol, mead can be made independently, organically, and without human intervention. All there needs to be is, if there is a beehive in a depression of some kind, and water gets into it, or even into a hive that's in a tree, because of the wild yeast that's already in the honey, and because of the presence of the water, a natural fermentation will start within hours to days at the most. And then all someone would just happen to do is just stumble upon this cache of naturally made alcohol, which is why it's the easiest to make, because even if you leave a jar of honey uncovered outside in the rain, you can get the same result. It might not be the best quality, but it is a decent quality, and one that you do not have to put a great deal of work into to making in a general form. But the beverage itself, so widely used was it in the ancient world, it was called nectar of the gods. Mead was linked to divinity, to magical properties, believed to grant immortality, strength, and wisdom. It was first found to be the oldest beverage, as residue of mead was found in China 9,000 years ago on pots that were dated back for that date, along with some fruit and some rice. You wouldn't think that goes well together, but I guess to them it did. So there's that. And then, of course, the ancient Greeks, even though they're known for drinking wine, for ancient Greek literature, before wine came on the scene and became more widespread, it is recorded that they're drinking nectar, which is another name for mead. And so mead has been present across a wide swath of Europe, Africa, Asia, in multiple cultures, in those sections of the world over. But most notably, it's known for its Northern European and Viking influence. And there's a particular reason for that. In medieval Europe, and more importantly, medieval Norway, only about 1% of the land was arable, in that you could only farm about 1% of the land. And when you can only farm 1% of your land, you're not likely to use it to make alcohol with, because, well, you need the rest of it to survive. And so you use what you have. And if you have honey, and you have bees, and the honey from the bees that pollinates the grain that you need to live is then able to be used for alcohol that you can then drink, that's a 2-for-1 deal if you think about it. But also, too, you have, in another respect, you brew alcohol typically out of your surplus crop. For example, today in the United States, the vast majority of vodka that is made here domestically is made from corn, because that is our surplus crop. In France, it is wheat. In Russia, it is potatoes, because those are the surplus crops in those regions. And so you make alcohol based on what you have, what your surplus crop is. And while the Vikings or the medieval Norwegians or Scandinavians may have had other things, honey is what they had to use. And it also prompted them to immigrate, you might say, to other parts of Europe, seeking to share their culture, albeit at the point of a sword. So it's kind of a mixed bag there. But also, too, when you don't have long growing seasons, you have to be mindful of that as well. And Northern Europe didn't have long growing seasons and didn't get great crop yields until relatively recently in the scheme of things, the last few hundred years. So that is one of the reasons why there was a dominance of mead in Northern Europe for a considerable period of time. But everything that goes up does eventually come down. Honey in Northern Europe and in Europe broadly, as well as other parts of the world, was the dominant sugar that one used in baking and other sweeteners. And as a result, most communities had a community beehive that they would draw from to get the sweeteners for the goods that they were making. But it was also hard to transport, difficult to trade, and led to exploration elsewhere. Beer was another factor too. Beer wasn't that good for quite some time. It existed for a long time, but it was really only around in the 1400s where it starts to improve in its quality, and that was for two reasons. One, you start to get longer growing periods in parts of Europe, and as a result, you get more crops that you can use to that and then play around with and experiment with and make better qualities of things. But also, the beer brewers of the time are discovering that if they add various spices to the beer, like hops, it tastes better. It also improves the shelf life. And as that becomes more widespread, it becomes more cheaper, less expensive, more widely available. And that's a factor in the death knell of mead long term. Distilled beverages is a big one. Distilling technology has been around for a long time. It was originally created by an Arab scientist in Algeria in the 8th century who wasn't even trying to make alcohol. He was trying to distill rose oil to make a better form of perfume. And then it took about 400 years for this technology to weave its way into Europe. And then at that point, the Europeans immediately thought, hey, maybe we can distill wine. And they did. And then they started that out with other beverages as well, making early forms of whiskey. And you can get a lot more bang for your buck as it pertains to the cost, the amount, the strength, how that hits you. And then you get exploration to the New Worlds. One of the most important exports that came out of the New World, or the West Indies most particularly in the Caribbean, was sugar. Prior to that period, it was possible to get sugar in medieval Europe, but you had to go through various Arab trading networks to get it, and they were unreliable, they were slow, you didn't get any kind of large quantity, and so you couldn't do a lot with it, and it wasn't utilized very heavily as a result. Even though it was more widespread, and that was more widespread in China and in India, in Western Europe it wasn't. But exploration to the New World changed all that. Also, beginning in the end of the 1400s and more so in the 1500s, that lends to a more steady supply of sugar. And one thing that's true of sugar is that it's became more affordable as a result of this. It's easier to transport, it's initially easier to use, and it creates a culinary revolution in Europe in baking, which changes the focus. So instead of using honey as your dominant sweetener, you're using sugar. And as a result, the focus on the need for honey starts to decline. And paired with other factors, such as better beer, such as distilled beverages, such as the focus shifting away, so too does the focus shift away from mead. And as land becomes scarcer, you might say, the people who have access to bees also becomes more limited, because those who do after this point in time is typically the Catholic Church. Various monasteries continue brewing mead. Various nobles and landholders who have interest in that have access to bees so they can do it. And so it becomes kind of a drink of the elite. But it does stay alive. It stays alive through a lot of cultural references. Mead is in a lot of literature, not just Western literature, Hindu literature, as well as notations from African culture, Chinese culture, but European literature gives it the most reference, not merely in Greek literature, Beowulf, Court of King Arthur, Robin Hood, a whole host of references in addition to the Vikings that allow it to stay alive culturally through literature. But most importantly, it stayed alive through beekeepers, because at the end of the day, you brew alcohol from what you have, and beekeepers would have access to a steady supply of honey, whereas the vast majority of the population, that became less of a thing, and it became less affordable. In the U.S. market today, a pound of sugar costs about $1. A pound of honey costs between $8 to $10. So even today, sugar is still more widespread, but mead persisted, it stayed alive, and there would be a rebirth. And that began, along with some other things as well, following the signage of the Home Brewers Act by President Jimmy Carter in 1978. This was not only good for mead, but it was good for other brewing as well, because it allowed any American citizen aged 21 or older to brew up to 100 gallons of beer or wine a year in their own home, or 200 gallons if more than one person lived with them, be it a spouse, a roommate, whatnot. It could be justified under that. Before, this would need to be reported, taxed, regulated, and that causes this boom of home breweries, of home startup winery operations, and of meaderies. Because prior to that, under Prohibition-era laws, you couldn't do any of this, or at least not openly. And so a lot of people just didn't. But President Carter and the legislation that he signed into law changed all of that. And that lends to the beginning of the rise of mead again. And now this lends into where my story begins in this. Many years ago, I was diagnosed with an autoimmune condition which basically results in me having a series of food sensitivities. In my late 20s, this culminated in by developing a sensitivity to gluten, and most particularly barley in any of its forms, which is unfortunate because I rather liked microbrews. And so, but I did try out wine, and I liked it well enough, but not quite. And though I had had mead before that I'd purchased in stores, it was just too damn sweet. Didn't like it. I was not a big fan. But in 2015, when I was living in Laramie, Wyoming, attending graduate school at the University of Wyoming to get a master's in social work, a friend of mine, Scott Lair, who's in the upper right-hand corner there, he started a meadery called The Great Untamed. And his meads were different than anything I had tried previously. They were dry, they were spiced dry, and I found that I really liked what he was making. In addition, I really liked the atmosphere and environment of his meadery as well, which was very tranquil, calming. It was a great place for discussions and games and conversations and stories. And that meant a great deal to me. And Laramie, not unlike aspects of Helena, is a town where you can pretty much walk anywhere, 2 in the afternoon, 2 in the morning. It's a great place to live. And I did walk home from this meadery many a time late at night, having enjoyed the product greatly, but also enjoyed the conversations and community that could be found there as well. And I also would like to add that Scott is a very generous man, but he's also a very tall man. In the lower picture over there, he is sitting down. I am standing up in that picture. So his meads allowed a journey to spark for me, because after graduate school and I moved to Casper, Wyoming, I couldn't find anything remotely close to what Scott made that was sold in stores. So I thought, you know what? I would start brewing my own. And I did. And I started making mead around the same time I became a clinical mental health therapist, because, it just seemed like the sane choice. I have since made over 60 different flavors of different types of mead. And, it's been a journey. It's been an interesting journey. And one of the things about this, too, is that when you have a heady profession, it's nice to have a hands-on hobby. It really balances you out. It can be very therapeutic for the practitioner to then become a brewer when they're not on duty. And it's been a lot of fun along the way. But when you start making mead, you want to first know what you're making. This is a really nice classification guide I found a few years ago that really nicely outlines what the different types of mead you can make are. I'm going to go over a couple of them, and then move on from there. But there's the traditional mead, which is called a show mead typically. It is just honey, water, and yeast. It can be between 7 to 14% alcohol. And you can use any kind of honey, any kind of yeast, and you can get this. The stacked mead is a little bit different. The stacked mead can be like a traditional mead, but it's often stronger, and you can add more things to it as far as different ingredients and you tend to get a higher alcohol percentage off that. A hydromel is kind of a 2/3 water, 1/3 honey type recipe in as far as the percentage, and as a result, you get a lower volume. It's about 7.5%. Mel is fruit and mead, and that can be made with a whole host of fruits: peaches, blueberries, strawberries, huckleberries, and you can get really interesting results off that too. Metheglin, or known as spiced mead, is made with spices and honey. Piment is made with grapes or grape juice and honey. Capsumel is spicy mead, peppers, or some sort of infused pepper honey and mead. Sizer, apples or apple juice and honey. You're noticing a pattern here, I'm sure, so I'll refrain from repeating all of them, but just to say that I have made most of these as of this point in time, or have tried to make most of these. I only tried making the Bochet, though, once, because that's a complicated mead to make because you are boiling the honey. And one of the things about honey that is not on the packaging is if you try to boil it, it will expand to several times its mass. And you want to have a very large pot when you're doing that. Because if you do not, it will come up out of the pot. And if you try to pick up the pot to move it, what falls on the eye will catch fire. And so if you're not paying attention, you can easily set your kitchen on fire doing this. And had I not been paying attention, that might well have happened. But if I ever do this again, I'm going to use a very big pot and a small amount of honey. But another thing important about this too is you probably don't want to be wearing a face shield when you do this, because when the honey boils, it pops up. And getting hit with hot honey in your face, that can take out an eye. And so you want to be very careful when you make that particular type of mead. But the rest are pretty non-lethal by comparison. But they are all very good. Now, honey is the most important ingredient in mead, but also honey is very healthy for you in and of itself. And that does get to be transferred over into the mead depending on how you do it. Now, honey in and of itself is very healthy. It is rich in antioxidants. The darker honey, the more antioxidants. It is a probiotic in that it's good for your gut. It's an antifungal and an antibacterial. You can put it on external wounds and have it heal. It is an immune system booster. It reduces inflammation in the body, rich in vitamins and minerals of a multifold. It is good for your blood sugar, whereas white sugar raises your blood sugar swiftly. Honey does that slowly. You can use it in one-to-one baking, too, if you want to start replacing your baking with honey as opposed to sugar in the future. It's also very good for allergies, for seasonal allergies. If you eat one or 3 tablespoons a day, 3 months prior to allergy season with local honey from the area, your body builds up a natural immunity to pollen-based allergies that you might have to that region. And if it is raw honey, that is the better type of honey. There's a distinctive difference between raw honey and otherwise, and that is to say that raw honey is not heated up when it is extracted from the hive. It is mildly strained and filtered to get the wax and the dead bugs out, but otherwise it is largely untouched. And then as a result of that, if it is not heated up, because honey is created at 97 degrees, because that's the internal temperature of a beehive, provided it is never heated up beyond that point for an extended period of time, that is to say more than 10 or 20 minutes, it will not crystallize for many years to come. So if you play out this experiment and you go into a store and it says raw honey, but it's a solid brick, likely it's not. They're just playing their audience for fools, and or their customers, rather. But if you heat up honey past that point, it will then crystallize. But if you don't, and it retains a lot of its health benefits. It still will retain some of its health benefits if you do this, but it will retain a lot more if you don't. And if you don't heat up your honey past 97 degrees when you seek to brew it, it will retain a lot of these nutrients in the vintages that you get out of it as well, which is why mead is the healthiest form of alcohol that you can create. And I have made mead with honeys from all over the United States, all over the world. And these are a few examples of them. I have about 30 to 40 different types of honey at home from various things I've tried over the years and retained, whether it be New Jersey cranberry blossom honey, Michigan star thistle honey, Italian linden blossom honey, Scottish heather blossom honey, California orange blossom honey, Manuka honey, and a whole other series. The other thing about raw honey is if you don't heat up honey when you extract it, you get more of the natural flavor, the floral flavor of that honey, and that gets transferred into the batches you make as well, which can make for unique tasting vintages at various levels. And I'll get into that in a little bit, but that is the start. To have good mead, you need to have good honey. Although when you start out, I would encourage getting something less expensive, because just because your first few batches you're going to be figuring out what you're trying to do. And it's not usually the best idea to get a specialty honey to experiment with. You can, but it just will cost you more. And so it's good to perfect something on a lower level before you kind of ratchet it up and try different things out. Spices is another important thing to get. High quality spices and the quality of the spices are going to make a big difference. Now, whether it's rose hips or cinnamon or lavender, nutmeg or coffee or marsh rosemary, or hibiscus, elderberry, or oak, all of these bring something very unique to the batch that you put it in. You can put it in at the beginning, you can add it at the end. I find that if you add it in the beginning and you initially put it in some boiled water and you let it steep for an hour, one, the water will have cooled sufficiently so you can then start to add other ingredients, including the honey, but two, it will also release the flavors of the spices, and if it brews with the honey, it makes a better taste. I've done this on both ends, where you add it at the beginning, add it at the end. It is better most of the time to add the spices at the beginning as opposed to at the end, but that's a personal preference choice too. And I will also say on a side note that in Helena, when getting spices in Helena, I have found that Real Foods Market has the best bulk spice assortment that you can get in town, and you can choose at any level to do that in too. Natural Grocers is a good secondary choice, but theirs are packaged. Both of them are good quality. I recommend both equally, but in the case of Real Foods Market, you can choose the volume you want, and there's a value to that too. There are other things you're going to need to make mead as well. You can just do a show mead and just do honey, wine, or honey, yeast, and water. But if you want to increase the flavor, to round out the flavor, to not use as much honey, there are other things you can add as well. Now, starting with the yeast, though, since I did bring it up, there are multiple different types of yeast. My favorite, having experimented with a lot of them, is Lavallin yeast. Lavallin is a Canadian-based company. They have a very high-quality style of yeast. They have multiple different types, but my favorite of them all is 71B 1122. 71B is what it's known as for short. That makes a mead that's about 12 to 14% alcohol on average, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less. And that yeast brings out the floral qualities of the honey, which is why I like that, because I like to taste what I'm drinking. Now, EC 1118, that's a power yeast. You might get something 17 to 18% off of. That's useful, too, if you're going for effect. Unfortunately, not unfortunately, but if your preference is to do that, one of the things that will happen is that it strips out the flavor to get to that percentage. You might have to back sweeten to do that. The RC212, that's kind of a round, full body thing that lends kind of a lot of Cabernets tend to use that yeast, and that can be good too. And then there are many other types of yeast too, and that kind of comes down to personal preference, taste, experimentation, and what you're trying to do. There are other ingredients as well, though. Wine tannin is my secret ingredient. Most mead makers don't use that. I rather like using it for three very important reasons. Number one, tannin is a natural preservative. You ever try? You can experiment with that at home with a red grape and a green grape. The red grape will retain its shelf life far longer than the green grape will. or any dark-skinned fruit, for that matter, will do that. But so tannin is a natural preservative in wines, and it is also something that is that cuts the sweetness, at least in my experience of using that. And that's very important because I'm a fan of dry wines, and so I like dry meads, and I want it to do that. And then there's in addition to those other two factors, it's also very good for you. Tannin is very good for your skin, it's very good for your immune system, and it's rich in antioxidants. The other ingredients that I've listed out are things that I use most of which I use regularly. Yeast nutrient and yeast energizer, that's something you can add at the beginning, you can add throughout your vintages. And the upside of that is it gives the yeast something more to feed on, because while honey is very nutritious for us, yeast, it doesn't give yeast a lot to feed on to create the fermentation process. So as a result, it's useful to have something to coax the yeast along and to keep it going, because otherwise you have to keep adding honey. And the downside of that is if you're going for a dry mead, you will get a sweet mead. And so the energizer and nutrient are derivatives from a dimonium phosphate, which is a artificial yeast nutrient and energizer to boost it along. There's also acids. You don't have to use acid. This is also a taste preference thing. I think it rounds out the flavor a little bit, but there are different types you can use. There's malic acid, there's talic acid, there's a malic-talic acid blend as to the right of the, or I guess left of the citric acid, depending on what screen you're looking at. And then there's citric acid. I tend to like using citric acid. Citric acid is made from limes and lemons. It's relatively, doesn't create much of a taste in the mead, whereas malic and talic acid creates a sharper taste, in my experience. You don't need a lot of that, but it just helps round it out a bit in its flavor. Bentonite would be used with clearing, but you don't necessarily have to use that. In fact, I usually don't use that because if you give something time or put it in a cold space, it will clear naturally. And then there is sulfites. Sulfites are something that a lot of winemakers, professional winemakers, use for two reasons. It will preserve the taste, but it will also stop the fermentation in its tracks, if that's what you're trying to do. Now, in a minute, I'm going to tell you how you don't necessarily need to do that, because I don't use sulfites in most of the meads I have made over the years, and I've had very few incidents that would have warranted that they be used. But one reason to use sulfites, though, too, is that it guarantees that you will not have a fermentation restart inside the bottle and then create what's called a bottle bomb, wherein which either, in the best case scenario, the cork is blown out of the bottle along with half the contents of the vintage, which makes quite the mess, or it blows up the bottle, in which it sends shards of glass at high velocity a short distance. I've never had that happen, but in fairness, of the hundreds of bottles that I've bottled over the years, I've only ever had that the first version of this happen twice. So it's very rare if you know what you're doing. The first time it happened to me, though, I didn't know what I was doing, so it's something that's good to know. But sulfites are not necessarily necessary to use, but you can use them if you want to. And for those of you with sulfite sensitivities, it's worth noting that there are more sulfites in a can of sardines than there is in a bottle of wine. So if there's that. There's not a lot per bottle in the scheme of things, but if that's a sensitivity, it's something to be mindful of. Now, when you start doing this, I would recommend getting a wine starter kit, as seen in the right and, I guess, right sides of the screen. I'm looking at this one, but it's a little bit jiggled. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. These are about $60 on Amazon or other sites, and it's worth getting because you get all of the tools you will need for the initial startup for any batch you would start through a wine starter kit. And I started off with 1 gallon. You can brew in plastic, you can brew in glass, you can brew in steel. You can also brew in oak too, but I personally like glass, and that's my preference. Plastic is the cheapest, but it's not as easy to seal. It might leach. It depends on the quality of the plastic is. Glass is easier because it's cleaner. It's easier to sterilize. You can watch the whole process, which can be rather therapeutic, I might add. And also, it's easier to seal to prevent contamination in the course of the brewing itself. I started off, as I noted, with one glass carboy. Now I have 16 of multiple different sizes. It is important to start small, but I'll get to that in a moment. Now this is another important two sets of tools. And now some mead makers do not use one of the ones I'm about to talk to you about, a tool known as a hydrometer. It's essentially a measuring device to measure the alcohol content and the gravity and the stability of your vintage. The reason it looks like a large thermometer, essentially, with markings on the side that measure ABV, which is a gravity measurement system, percentage, which measures alcohol percentage, and Brix, which is another measurement that is also used in the measurement of alcohol. I only use the first two, ABV and the percentage. And the way this works is when you first start a vintage, as shown in the middle column of that example, you measure the mead or the wine or whatever it is you're brewing from the outset, and you take an initial measurement, and you write down the measurement, what the ABV is, what its corresponding percentage is. And then, as time progresses, you take continuous measurements along the way to see where things are. This is important because when it's done, the needle won't move anymore. And that's how you know it's done. It's because if in that one at the end, where it's at nearly 1 ABV, which corresponds to 0 percentage, if it retains that measurement or stays at that point for 3 weeks consecutively, you get the same measurement for 3 weeks in a row, that will tell you that your wine is done. And it is not only stable in that the fermentation is not likely to restart, but it's stable enough to rack and then bottle, and then with a very low likelihood that there's going to be any kind of residual fermentation that starts up again. It also then tells you what your alcohol percentage is, because all you need to do is subtract your ending number from your starting number, and that's how you know what the percentage of the drink is that you have just made. Now, when it comes time to bottle this, that's where you're going to need this red contraption here. This is a wine corker. Whereas the hydrometer is probably one of the least expensive parts of the kit to buy, only about $7 on average, though I do recommend buying more than one because they're easy to break. The wine corker is the most expensive single item that you will buy. These cost about $80 to $90 a piece, but they will pay for themselves more than 1,000 times over, because you can rebottle, use old bottles. All you need is corks, and you can use that over and over again, and it doesn't break. It is interesting when you move. Movers don't know what to make of it, so they call it an art piece, which, is interesting too to think about. But these are very useful. You don't have to get them, but they're useful to have if you want to bottle things with standard corks in that model. Now, size also matters, as it happens, because it depends what level you're trying to brew at. If you're starting out with a 1-gallon carboy, you're going to get about 4 bottles of wine or mead. If you're starting out with a 3-gallon in the middle, that's going to get you about 10 to 12 bottles. If you're brewing with a 5-gallon carboy, that's going to get you about 20 to 22 bottles. And if you're brewing with a 6-gallon, that's going to get you 24 bottles, or 2 cases. But I encourage you to start small, because the higher you go up, the more expensive this gets. Brewing a 1-gallon carboy for mead is going to cost you about $20 collectively. Brewing a 5-gallon for honey alone is going to cost you about $100 or more, depending on the type of honey you're using and where it's coming from, because you have to factor in shipping costs if you're doing that. So start small, perfect what you're doing on a small scale, and then level yourself up from there. And that can make for a good brew. And also, too, one that you will feel pleased sharing if you brew at a higher level, because if you start something off at a high end as your starter batch, let's say you get a 5-gallon because you want to brew something in quantity, and it's not that good, well, you're going to be the one drinking it. So I hope you're okay with that, or are prepared to age for a number of years to have that effect. So, but that's why starting small is important. Now, bottling. These are different types of wine bottles that you can use. The three clear ones are called swing caps, swing cap bottles, and they're useful if you don't want to get a wine corker, but they're also more expensive to get. Whereas the green glass traditional bottle, that you can get a case of those off of Amazon or from most online sources for about $20 to $30 a case, and you can reuse them and you can give them away, so forth. These other bottles, the swing cap bottles, are a lot more expensive. A case of 750 milliliter swing caps, like the one next to the green glass, those cost about $50 a case. And if you pay that amount of money for these bottles, you're not likely going to feel that good about giving them away, or you're going to really want them to be people you know will give them back to you, so that you can retain that cost, because otherwise it's more bang for your buck to just get a wine corker and then just get a series of bottles. And it doesn't matter what color you use. I like using green. That's a preference thing. But the beauty of mead, unlike grape wine is, or like white wine, for example, it doesn't matter what the shade of glass is, because mead preserves itself a lot better than most other forms of alcohol because it's made from honey, and honey naturally preserves itself anyway. That's the benefit there. And so the glass color is just a preference. And then the corks are very inexpensive. You can get a bag of 100 for less than $20. So there's that aspect too. So it's just a matter of what size you want to use and and the style. Sterilization. This is very important as well. Probably almost the most important. So that when you get carboys, you want to sterilize them initially, so that so you don't have to worry about any contaminants. You could probably start them without doing that, but you don't. But I would advise sterilizing first. Then you want to sterilize all of your tools that you're using after each time you test, because otherwise you risk contaminating your mead, getting a bacterial or infection. And although it is true that honey is antibacterial, that it's compromised when it's brewing. Because yeast, on the other hand, is very bacterial, so it doesn't play to your favor. I've had that happen once. I don't think it was the tools, though. I think it had something to do with the honey, because I did it several times and it still got the same effect. But nonetheless, one step is very good for sterilizing bottles, as well as for sterilizing brewing kits and or your tools, as well as the carboys themselves. The Camden tablets can be used to sterilize tools, but they're more importantly used to sterilize wine corks. You need to soak traditional corks in this solution for about an hour to sufficiently sterilize the corks and also preserve them in turn. Then you dry them out, and they should be good to go. But that's very important to get as well. These are relatively inexpensive, but one of the most important chess pieces on your board. And then this is what it starts to look like when you put it together. In as you can see in the carboys that are below the maps, those are all primaries at various stages of having been started. None of them have been racked yet. And as you can see, I keep notes because I think that's important to know where things are. I take the first measurement initially when I start the batches, then I don't take another measurement for 2 weeks, because I want the carbonation to not be disturbed and to let the various nitrogen and carbon that's coming up out, because then it has to repressurize itself, and that can slow down the fermentation, and it also introduces oxygen. And I don't prefer to do that until the vintage is more or less done, and usually after 2 weeks with my particular recipe, it's close to being done or it is done. I just have to wait the 3 weeks for it to stabilize if I wanted to do that, and then longer if I wanted to do that to let it clear, because you can add things for it to clear, but it will do that naturally too. Now, in the other picture, this is what it looks like to rack, where you essentially use a siphon and a suction tubing to move it from one carboy to another. Doing that on a table is better, but that was initially a 5-gallon carboy, and I wasn't going to pick that up. You can do that alongside, but if you can raise it to a higher platform and have what you're putting it into lower, gravity is your friend, and it helps out with that process. But that's what that can look like too, when you start moving product from one thing to another. And then after you rack, you can hold that as long as you want to until you're ready to bottle, and then you use the exact same process with the siphon and tubing to put it into bottles. And then this is another picture of what this process can look like. As you can see in the one next to the red mead, you want to leave some head space because when the yeast initially starts to ferment, it's going to come up practically to the lip of the carboy. And so if not outrightly go through the airlock. If it's a mel, the risk there is that it might stop up the airlock and then it might blow the airlock out. And if it does that, that can make a bit of a mess. I've only had that happen a few times, but again, scale matters. When my friend Scott made a banana mead, he put raw bananas into the mead, which stopped it up, pressurized it at a 5-gallon rate, and caused a geyser effect to douse an entire room of a house that he was renting. But as he later said in the story, the landlord was a tweaker and didn't care. But I think probably many of you would care. So it's good to be mindful of that. And if you think what you're going to make might come up might go through the airlock or might risk blowing out the airlock, it's useful to put it in a bucket or put something over it or put it in a cooler. I've done that as well sometimes. And then the middle pitcher, most of the smaller gallons are all racked vintages, just waiting to be you can see that because a lot of them are more clear. And then the latter pitcher with the bubbles and the tubing is one I just liked. I thought it was really beautiful and wanted to share that with you. Now, mead, as I mentioned earlier, is very environmentally friendly as well. When you think about your favorite beer or wine, do you also think about how much that cost in land, in water, in resources, in labor, in gasoline to move the ingredients back and forth, whether it's seed or the harvest or the stock or moving it around? In 2019, the Montana State University put out a study about how much water it took to make 1 gallon of beer in Montana. And they found that it took between 4 to 8 gallons of water to make 1 gallon of beer. You know how many gallons of water it takes to make 1 gallon of mead? Less than 1 gallon, because honey occupies the other remaining space. So, and it doesn't take any water to cultivate honey beyond what the bees are in the area that the bees are feeding on. Bees are not going to fly outside of a mile of their hive in their entire lifetimes. So if you put a beehive in an area, it's going to pollinate your crops, your orchard, your vineyard, and you're going to get various types of honey off of that, which you can then make into mead. And if you calibrate your mead correctly, you can make it taste like certain things. I just happen to make several types of mead that taste like beer. Kempert Light was made in honor of a friend of mine in Laramie who was a big fan of light beer. And so I made a mead in honor of him that tastes like a light beer of your choice, but has also the strength of a lager. Then there hopped orange blossom and hopped wildflower meads, made from wildflower honey and orange blossom honey respectively, added a German hops that I reconstituted and then added to the mead itself. Those taste like an IPA, but at 13 to 14% alcohol. And then Dark Star is made from a Minnesota buckwheat blossom mead, or buckwheat blossom honey. And that is a extremely nutrient-rich honey, and it is nearly black in its color. As I like to say, from the darkest of honeys came one of the brightest stars, hence why I named it Dark Star. And that tastes like a Guinness or a porter, but at 12 to 13% alcohol. So when we consider the droughts, crop shortages, effects of climate change, the fact that we might have to reappropriate how we use crops going forward into the future to feed a hungry nation and a hungry world, mead might be the solution to quench your thirst while still maintaining high crop yields needed for other purposes. A 2-for-1, because you make alcohol out of what you have. Now, how do you share this? This is very important as well. This is something that I recently learned a lot about in the course of last year, and it's important because although the Home Brewers Act allows you to make up to 1 to 200 gallons of beer or wine in your home, and allows you to share that with anyone who comes to your home, or if you go to someone else's home, a friend or a family member, because it's seen as a familial exchange of friends and family, and that's all fine. How do you share it outside of that? And it's important to know what the laws and the rules are around that. before you do that, because this is one of these things where it's a lot better to ask permission than to beg forgiveness. There could be very real-world consequences if you try the opposite version of that saying. This is also one of the harder parts too, because this is something that's constantly changing and often doesn't make the front page of the newspaper and you might not even find out about for some time. This annotated code that was passed in the fall legislative session of 2023 dictates how home wine and mead and beer makers can share their vintages outside. And rather than make you read the small fine print of that law, there are several bullet points which more or less sum this up. Mainly, if you're to share this outside of your home, you can only do that in establishments that do not already have a serving, retail, or a production license. So it has to essentially be an empty vessel, and the host or the owner or the person who has that facility has to be on board with what you're doing in accordance with this law. Furthermore, homebrew events can only be RSVP. They cannot be open to the public. Hence why I did not have samples tonight. They must be free of charge. You cannot charge, as the host or the organizer of an event, you cannot charge for a homebrewed event, as that would be very, very patently illegal to do, because unlicensed alcohol cannot be sold, nor admission to obtain it. And even at these events, nothing can be sold at these events. Not glassware, not merch, not various Celtic and Gaelic knickknacks and ornaments that people like to bring to these events, leatherwork that people might want to sell. You can't sell any of it. And then obviously everyone has to be 21 years of age or older. And most especially, no professional brewers, winemakers, mead makers can come to your event with product. They can come as guests. But their license as brewers, professional brewers, prohibit them from being able to bring their own vintages in conjunction with home brewers. And that's something that went into effect in 2024. And so that that needs to be adhered to as well, because then either the home brewer or the winemaker, the professional, can lose their license if they do this. The home brewer might get in trouble as well, but it's going to be far less severe than the professional, or the person who organized the event for that matter, because they should know better. And then, for any questions, contact the Montana Alcohol Beverage Consumption Division. These people are the keeper of the keys to what you can do and what you can't do. And if you have any questions, they are more than happy to answer your questions and to tell you how things work in conjunction with the law as it is written. Sometimes they might not know, but they'll certainly point you in the right direction to do the research yourself. And having taken some things at face value previously, I can tell you from experience, it's good to do your own research so you know where you stand, because so that no fault can fall on you, because it is a shared responsibility, but you have a responsibility too. And so when you find these things out, it's good to abide by them, because you don't want to be a member of the let's run red light society and hope nothing happens. Can we wait till the end on that? I would say brew on it, and we'll sample it together when the Q&A comes up, okay? Now, money can't buy happiness, but it can buy a cup of good mead, as Ragnar Lothbrok from the History's TV show Vikings pointed out, or at least is being attributed in this particular image. And so let me tell you who you can buy a cup of good mead from. There are 3 professional mead makers in Montana, the first of whom is Ken Schultz of Hidden Legend Winery. He opened his establishment in 2005. He is the first mead maker in Montana, but he called it a winery because either the state of Montana couldn't quite conceptualize what a meadery was at that point in time in one of his tellings of it, or it could have been because he had been previously a part of another winery and then bought them out, and then because he had a winery license, he named it after what he had. But more than 90% of what he makes is mead. His establishment is in Victor, Montana, which is 30 miles south of Missoula. It's worth seeing. He's got a very impressive operation, but it's also worth trying out as well. And all of his vintages, a few of his vintages, are sold in every store or every grocery store and some of the liquor stores in Helena, and they're certainly worth trying out. The second mead maker is Dylan McKenna. He is the owner and mead maker of Valhalla Meadery that opened in 2017 in Bozeman. I'm not aware that he is selling his meads outside of Bozeman, so you have to go there, but he has a really great meadery set up. It's very cozy. It's an interesting environment. There's food there, and he's also very generous and is willing to impart recipes and ideas and give you appraisal on what you've done as well. And so I would encourage you to hop on down to Valhalla Meadery next time you're in Bozeman and check out what he's got going on, because it's some pretty good stuff too. And then the last, or to date, the final meadery the third meadery in Montana is Bearded Viking Mead Company. This was founded by J.T. Robertson in Columbus, Montana. That's near Billings. And his meads, I've not been to his meadery yet, but I've tried a number of his meads. They're also really interesting. And he, as well as all of these other mead makers, have very interesting background stories. They're worth hearing more than once if you have the opportunity. So, or check out what they're doing. JT is currently doing a very active social media and advertising campaign and expansionist campaign as well. Most of his meads, and a lot of his meads rather, can be found also in every store, every grocery store in Helena, and a lot of the gas stations too, Town and Pump most especially. And they're also very interesting in their array of flavor profiles. Ken will usually be at the Helena Highland Games doing a presentation on mead. I would encourage you to go to that because he gives a really excellent presentation on mead and mead making as well. But then if you have the opportunity to hear any of these other mead makers speak, they're also very interesting because everyone has a good story when you're a brewer, because you gain a lot of wisdom along the way and it's just fun to impart it. But when you are doing that and trying out different things, it's good to cross-compare. That's another reason why it's good to talk to the professionals. I had tried Ken's King's Pyment a few years ago, and it was interesting, but I thought I'd try my own hand at that and to then cross-compare. And my version tasted like a dry Concord grape. His version, by contrast, tastes like a semi-sweet pureed strawberry, which was also kind of good, And so you need to know what... So in order to brew good mead, it's good to try good mead. It's good to cross-compare and be able to have that basis of comparison for what you're doing so that you can decide what you like, what you're trying to emulate, or who's better than you, because sometimes there will be things that people will make that you either can't match up to, or you just appreciate buying more than making. So it's good to have that basis of comparison for those factors as well. And finally, you meet a lot of interesting people along the way. It's a colorful cast of characters, as you can see. And this was taken at a Mead event in the spring of 2023 that I had attended. And it's a fun time because you get to try different vintages, get different appraisals, and share a lot of stories and poetry and songs and laughter and camaraderie. And that's kind of what it's about in the end. It's about community and bringing people together. And if it's around a cup of good cheer, all the more so. And so it's a fun opportunity. And so when events come up, be it someone who is a mead maker who has invited you to a private event, or there is a professional mead event that's being put on under a special permit license, or that other things are coming up too, it's fun to go to these things and just check it out, because you will be enhanced by the journey as well. And finally, if you're a reader, these are several books that I have enjoyed over the years and that have been very influential and helpful to me in my mead-making journey. I would say that while all of them are good, and I've read each of them more than once, the one that I would recommend the most is Ken Straham's The Complete Mead Maker. That is a stellar book, and that will give you a lot of insights. All of them come with recipes. All of them come with great insight and history and knowledge, and there's a lot to be gained. And then it gives you a basis either to follow, a recipe to emulate, something to try out, different honey comparisons, and the rest. And so, that's what makes the journey beautiful, because it's fun to try out different things and to have a knowledge base of where things are coming from, and then how you can impact that as well through your process, your journey. And so, in conclusion, I want to thank you for giving me a glass of your time this evening. And I want to once again thank the Montana Historical Society for the honor to present to you today. And with that, I bid you all good health and happy mead making. Cheers.
Thank you, Kyle. I learned a ton from that, and now I'm very interested in figuring out how we can have a more interactive, taste-involving session of this without violating any licensing things. So we have some time for questions. So I'll come around with the mic if you raise your hand so that we can get your question on the recording that we have. And if you need to review Kyle's process later, we will have this recording up on YouTube if you're gonna follow it along to try making your own.
When they talk about the codes and having the private events, is that just because you want to have fun, or why would you want to do something where you can't make any money?
Well, I'm not licensed. I'm not a professional licensed mead maker, so I can't make any money. Anyone who's doing this is doing it for fun. It's the love of the game. And so I really like sharing this with people. And I could probably have, it would be a tight fit, but I could probably have 12 people over to share, but maybe I'd want to have more. And I have a number of friends who are mead makers as well. And it can be fun to kind of get together and see what my fellow home mead makers and home brewers are making and try out what they've got going on and then share that with others. See what people like and see what works, and also just have a good time together in a large space. And that can be there's a great benefit to that. Bigger size. So it's just the space of the gathering, and and that's what the state of Montana will allow too. I mean, so there are we have to abide by the laws of the societies we live in order for it to be a healthy society. So when those are discovered, it makes sense to abide by them, and so that's the reason there. And and also too, I've taught people how to make mead before for nothing. And I hope to do that again because I enjoy it. So again, it's the love of the game.
Hi, I'm having somebody's making some mead for me, a few bottles. How do you store it for like a wine cooler, or will it keep for?
Oh yeah.
Properly.
Well, is it corked or is it capped?
I believe I think he said he was going to put it in those the
Swing
lighting
corks?
cap.
The swing caps. Yeah. Well, in that case, if it's in a swing cap bottle, I would keep it upright. If it's in a corked, either with a composite cork or a natural cork, you can lay it parallel or flat. But if it's something that's freshly brewed and it's in a cork, a natural cork, you want to keep that upright for a couple of days because that will allow any residual gases to come through the cork, so that that doesn't cause problems for you later on. But if it's in a swing cork, it's just keeping that upright is sufficient. And if you keep it in a cooler, that will maintain. You can do that. That will maintain flavor, but you don't have to. That's kind of a misnomer. Mead sometimes gets mistaken as a white wine, and people feel compelled to chill it. It's actually better at room temperature. If you chill a beverage, it dampens the taste. So if you want to have a more full flavored taste, you can chill it if you want to, but it's better to leave it at room temperature. And again, this will last for years. I've aged mead presently in bottles for more than 5 years, and it still tastes very good, if not better, because that saying about how a good wine gets better in time is also true for mead. So.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Honeybees.
Yes.
A lot of the hives are dying off. Do you source the honey from all over?
Yes. I've used several different types of Montana honey, Wyoming honey, regional honey, national. But I find I enjoyed trying out different flavors, and so yes, I source it from all over and different parts. It's just what appeals to me and what I'm trying to make, what flavor profile I'm going for. If I'm making a spiced mead, you can get something local for that, or something that's kind of a generic wildflower, generic clover, and that's fine. Or a melomel would also do for that as well. Just getting a clover or a wildflower. But different honeys are all created equal, but they taste different depending on what they are. And it depends on what you're trying to make, too. If you're trying to make a dry mead, a semi-sweet, a sweet, if you used it based on just honey ratio alone, and I usually measure in grams, so I'll just convert for pounds for this instance. But if you're trying to make a dry mead, 2 to 2.5 pounds per gallon will get you a dry mead. Usually, depending on what you're doing. 2.5 to 3 pounds will get you a semi-sweet, and 3 pounds or more will get you a sweet mead if you use those ratios per gallon. That's not always the case, but it often is, and it can vary based on what type of yeast and what type of honey it is. For example, a clover or an orange blossom, if you do more than 2.5 pounds per gallon, that will be a sweet automatically. But it just depends what you're getting. And yes, I mean, there is hive die-out, but I hope that doesn't happen because, as Albert Einstein noted, if the honeybees were to die off, the human race would be extinct in 4 years, because although you can pollinate crops with humans, it's expensive, it's incredibly labor intensive, and it's not nearly as good. So I hope that doesn't happen.
You're not a beekeeper?
No, but my father is, or was. Actually, he was the beekeeper that was featured in one of the pictures early on in the presentation. And that's actually what I named some of my mead after, because he called his honey Joyner's Corner honey, so I named mead that was made with his honey Joyner's Corner mead. So, no, I've been fortunate to have kind of an insight into the beekeeper's line as well.
Thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions?
Are there any considerations as to the type of water that you use? Do you use tap water or?
I filter all water I use through a Brita filter, and then I'll heat some of it up, but only to about 90 to 100 degrees at most. If I'm brewing with a tea or a spiced mead, I will use boiling water initially, and then let that brew and then that cool down sufficiently before I add any honey, or I'll just add extra water. But and when you reconstitute yeast, you have to heat the water up to a certain temperature in order to reconstitute the yeast. You could throw it in dry, but the results might not be as good. But as far as the quality of the water, I've played around with different types of water: distilled, spring water, tap water. I think just using a Brita filter is sufficient.
Is it always bottled, or can it also be canned? And also, are there bars or breweries in Helena that sell mead?
There are no bars or breweries that sell mead to my knowledge. However, if you were a brewery, you couldn't sell mead because it's a different licensing. Brewery licenses only cover beer, and they cover the beer you make. You can't sell other things that other people make unless you have a specific retailer license to do that. A lot of breweries choose not to do that. As far as can you can it? Yes. I don't have the tech to do that, but I know that some people do. But I also know that it can be expensive to do that. So usually you're not doing that unless you're a professional meadery. But a friend of mine who lives out in California has sent me pictures of mead that he's gotten in the can out there. So it is something that's doable. I just don't know of anybody in the region who's doing it in cans.
The other thing, I was thinking that babies can't have honey, but they can have sugar. Why is that? Is that, if it's true, it's just in the back of my head?
I have heard a number of medical professionals say that. I don't know why that's the case. I think it might have to do with digestive ability, because honey is a complex sugar. But I would actually have to look into that further to answer that question for you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I think we will close out there. So thank you so much, Kyle, for joining us today. We have a few more minutes before we have to be out of the building at 8, so feel free to come up and chat a little bit. And we hope to see you at our upcoming programs. Thank you.
Thank you.